Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is another episode of Horror News Roundup, the series where I discuss all the latest horror-related news of the past week. Thank you all for joining me. Now let's talk horror. We start with the news that Adam Green, the director behind the Hatchet franchise and the 2010 horror film Frozen, will be directing his first feature film in 8 years with The Ascent. It's a survival thriller with sharks. Next up, we have Robert Eggers, who's teasing his next project, which he says will be a medieval werewolf movie. That's the darkest thing he's ever written. That sounds truly awesome, and it's something I'm very excited to see, because every one of his movies so far has been a banger. Nosferatu was one of the best horror films of 2024. The Witch is, of course, an iconic piece of horror cinema, and I think the idea of him tackling a werewolf film just sounds so intriguing, because I really do think that werewolf movies have a lot of untapped potential, that whole subgenre, and it also gives me hope about werewolf movies after the disappointment of Leigh Whannell's version of Wolfman earlier this year. Our next piece of news is brought to us by Bloody Disgusting. We have directors David Charbonnier and Justin Douglas Powell, who have set up their next project, a survival horror movie titled The Nowhere Game, that will be starring Kiernan Shipka and McKenna Grace. Now, the reason I brought this one up to our attention is just because I absolutely adore and love Kiernan Shipka. I think that she is truly becoming a scream queen. She's awesome in a lot of the works of Osgood Perkins. Of course, she was great in Blackcoat's Daughter. And even in her small role, she was absolutely just nailing it out of the park in Longlegs. Now, the film itself does seem to have a pretty standard premise, but it does sound kind of interesting. Here's the little description that Bloody Disgusting gives us. The film follows Karen and Allie, whose road trip takes a harrowing turn when the two young women are kidnapped by a cold-blooded sadist and thrust into a brutal game of survival. With a short head start, Karen and Allie will be set loose in the forest with limited supplies while being hunted in front of an online audience watching in grim fascination. With no sign of civilization and no way to call for help, the women rely on their wits and each other to evade capture. Navigating the hostile wilderness, they discover eerie clues left behind by previous contestants, painting a grim picture of the stakes they face. As the hunter closes in, realization dawns on them. Survival isn't just improbable, it's nearly impossible. Karen and Allie must shed their fear and transform from prey to predator to bring this twisted game to its final bloody conclusion. The film's screenplay was featured on the 2023 Blacklist. It was written by Alex Patatsky. This does bring to mind things like The Most Dangerous Game and films like The Card Player by Dario Argento. This idea of online snuff films, playing with your victims, things like that, an online audience, this has been done before, but nonetheless, even if this is done in a completely standard way, which I hope it doesn't, I hope that there's a lot of awesome subversion of what we expect, but nonetheless, I think Kiernan Shipka is going to be great in it. She's been really excellent in her young career, and I continue to follow her career with great interest. The next piece of news is brought to us from Deadline.com, which is reporting that filming has wrapped on Francesca Eastwood's shark thriller The Bay. The film is directed by Phil Volkin, who I must admit to not knowing very well, though his survival thriller Dead Sea, I guess, was a big hit on Netflix when it debuted in September of 2024, at least according to this article. He says that, "I've made several films set on the open sea, and The Bay is the culmination of my experience to date." The film is going to be completely immersive and terrify audiences worldwide, so we'll see about that. Next up, we have a pair of really big-time horror home video releases coming out in the next week. We have Nosferatu coming out on 4K, Blu-ray, and DVD, with an extended cut as well as an audio commentary. On the 18th, it'll be released. I'm really excited to see what the extended cut can bring. I'm excited to hear about the behind-the-scenes things with the film, the audio commentary. I'm a big audio commentary buff, especially for horror movies, and Nosferatu is definitely a film that I'm definitely going to want on home video, because I think that it's going to really hold up for years and years as a big-time horror classic. We're also going to be getting a new 4K release of Constantine from Warner Bros. On the 18th as well. This is a film that I really like. It's a film that I have on DVD. I don't really plan on upgrading to the 4K just yet, but it is a film that I do like, and I do think it is one of the best of its type of the early 2000s action horror hybrid type films. I'm not a big reader of the comic books, so I'm not really sure how well of an adaptation it was or anything like that. I just found it a very enjoyable film, and I'm very much looking forward to the sequel that was rumored, announced. I don't really quite remember, but I know Keanu Reeves is supposed to be coming back. That's definitely a film that I think has a lot of potential, because I do think that this film could have even been better than it was, but for what it is a pretty enjoyable film. Next, I want to talk about the marketing campaign for Osgood Perkins' new film, The Monkey. Now, here we see is a poster that they released recently, which is parodying the Pasolini film Medea from 1969. Now, the film, on the poster, it says, "It's a movie about twin brothers who discover a toy monkey that likes killing their family. There is outrageous violence, shocking gore, and unspeakable tragedies. For Osgood Perkins, it's pretty funny. The Monkey, a new trip from Osgood Perkins based on the short story by Stephen King and produced by James Wan." So yeah, I thought that was just kind of an intriguing poster. I think it reflects the marketing angle that this film is trying to go with, is trying to really lean into the film's supposed identity as a dark comedy. Now, what does that mean to be a comedy to Osgood Perkins? Does it mean to be like Longlegs, where you have all this dark and grim material, but you have some really funny moments sprinkled in throughout? Or is it going to really lean into being a comedy film first, with just some dark subject material that's sort of grounding the story? So yeah, I'm just very excited to see the new film from Osgood Perkins. I don't think it's going to make $1 billion or anything like that. It's not going to be a big box office hit. And while I think this is a clever marketing campaign, it obviously has not been as effective as Longlegs. But nonetheless, like I said, I'm very excited to see the film. I'm definitely going to go and see it in the theaters. And I continue to look forward to following Osgood Perkins' career. Next up, we have a story from Fangoria with the article headlined, "Adam Scott leads supernatural horror hokum from Oddity's Damien McCarthy." So I'm a fan of Adam Scott. Also, I'm someone who's intrigued by the work of Damien McCarthy. I've seen Oddity and I liked the film. I have still yet to track down Caveat. I gotta watch that film at some point. But Variety revealed that the film is set to begin shooting in Ireland later this month, according to the article in Fangoria. Hokum will see Scott play a horror novelist who visits a remote Irish inn to spread his parents' ashes, unaware the place is rumored to be haunted by a witch. This is definitely a film I'll have to keep my eye on. I love that McCarthy is going to continue to work within the supernatural horror film realm. Next up is another piece of news coming from Fangoria with the headline stating, "Japanese horror game Exit 8 getting live-action adaptation from Toho." Now, the article states, Jinki Kawamura is set to write and direct the labyrinth horror said to have undertones of Alice in Wonderland and Squid Game. According to Deadline, Exit 8 heads to the European film market next week, looking to launch sales for a US release. Now, I guess this is based on a liminal walking simulator released back in 2023. I've never heard of the game, but it does sound kind of intriguing. And it's also interesting to kind of think of the idea of how do you make a game that's a liminal horror walking simulator into a movie. Something where I guess you have to like pick up on details, how it's changing in the environment as you continue to loop through, maybe sort of similar to like PT. It seems to kind of fit within the trend of analog horror that's really become huge on the internet over the last like decade or so. I've never been a huge fan of analog horror, to be honest, though I saw the TV Glow, which was my 2024 horror movie of the year, really did change my perception on the possibilities of the subgenre, and so now I am kind of intrigued to see how this adaptation does. And the idea of really turning this sort of liminal horror walking simulator into a movie is something that is intriguing at the least. Next up, we have an article from Deadline, whose headline reads, "Magenta Light Studios acquires Rennie Harlin's thriller Deep Water, starring Aaron Eckhart and Ben Kingsley." The film was written by Pete Bridges and John Kim and will be released in theaters this year. And you can be assured that I will not be in the theaters to see this film because I hate Rennie Harlin right now. I hate his films. I hate The Strangers Chapter 1 so much. Where is the sequels, right? We were supposed to be getting those all released in such a tight window. I guess maybe they're supposed to be going on to streaming this year, and I'll probably hate watch them and give my reviews and thoughts on those as well. Now, look, he is a hack, lazy director in my opinion, especially at this point. At some point, he did kind of have some talent and made some intriguing movies, but I have no faith in him making a decent shark thriller, which I guess is what this is, a disaster-type movie. Like, no, I just don't have any faith whatsoever in Rennie Harlin at this point. I expect this film to be a complete, embarrassing flop for him. Moving on to news that I'm much more interested in, Josh Rubin's Hard Eyes was able to bring in a box office haul of $8.5 million in its opening weekend at the domestic box office. This is great news for the film, and I'm a big fan of it. I gave my review on this channel last week when I went and saw it in the theaters, and I definitely think it's a fun movie that I definitely recommend horror fans go and watch. I think that it'll continue to do well at the box office, at least for another week for Valentine's Day. It's definitely a fun little slasher rom-com. Rubin also gave an interview with Bloody Disgusting in which he talked about some of his influences for the film. He stated, quote, "My gold standard, my North Star, was Tommy McLaughlin's Jason Lives. That film is as brutal as it is silly as it is fun, and that was The White Whale. Then everything after that was Searching Within Myself, the kid that loved rom-coms like Sleepless in Seattle, which is as funny and sweet as it is heartbreaking, super well acted but also silly, etc. Also movies like Defending Your Life and Big and so on and so forth," end quote. So yeah, I definitely see the influence that something as ridiculous and silly as Jason Lives, how that would have an imprint on Hard Eyes, which I think is a really great blending of genres. Jason Lives is just a ridiculous, over-the-top Friday the 13th movie that definitely deserves some love, but Hard Eyes is definitely a very solid blending of comedy, especially rom-coms, with slasher films, and it feels fresh and fun, and I definitely recommend it, like I said. And Rubin's definitely a director that we have to keep our eye on as horror fans. So yeah, interesting to kind of hear him speak a little bit more about the process, the influences that he had, and I think Jason Lives is a great film to have as your white whale for a modern slasher film released in the theaters in 2025. Next up, we have some awards season news with The Substance getting 3 awards at the Critics' Choice Awards, including Best Actress for Demi Moore, Best Original Screenplay for Coralie Fargeau, and Best Hair and Makeup, with Demi Moore shouting out the horror genre in her acceptance speech, stating,
"But that you have highlighted this film, this genre of normally horror films that are overlooked and not seen for the profundity that they can hold."
I absolutely love that quote, and I love Demi Moore's performance in The Substance. It's a film that absolutely deserves getting all sorts of recognition at award shows. It's one of the best horror films of 2024, and look, her quote definitely rings true, right? Genre films in general, horror, comedy, action, absolutely get overlooked by the sort of mainstream film press and the award season and all that kind of stuff, not being highbrow, pretentious, or intellectual enough, whatever you want to say. But at the end of the day, who really cares, right? What they have to say. We don't need validation from them. Horror fans, horror creators are continuing to make stuff that is appreciated for the profundity that it can have and the depth that it can have and the fun and entertainment that it can provide, if nothing else. And I think that's all that really matters at the end of the day, not getting mainstream approval or validation or anything like that. But it is nice when you do get it, and The Substance absolutely deserves to get recognition, as well as a number of other great horror films over the years that have been overlooked. Finally, we have an article from Variety. The headline states, "Cineverse acquires Australian slasher Wolf Creek Legacy for North American release." Now, the article states Cineverse and its horror division, Bloody Disgusting, have acquired the North American rights to Wolf Creek Legacy, the third installment in the Australian slasher franchise. Production begins later this year, and the film is expected to hit theaters in the fall of 2026. Sean Lahiff will serve as director, while Wolf Creek creator Greg McLean will produce the film alongside Bianca Martino and under the Emu Creek Pictures banner. I'm really excited to see this film. Supposedly it's going to be like down and gritty horror film like the original. And like I was just talking about in last week's video, I literally just was mentioning it, how I think now that Gen Z is growing older, we're going to be getting more and more early 2000s nostalgia coming back, and I think this is definitely emblematic of that. It's trying to go back into that original style. I think that's exciting for me as someone who is Gen Z and someone who does have a lot of early 2000s nostalgia. But if you're someone who's not like that, you're just going to have to deal with it because it's definitely coming. And I think that I'm excited for this movie. I liked the original. It's one that I actually studied. I actually watched it in college in a film class, a horror film class that I took. So I definitely look forward to seeing Wolf Creek Legacy and seeing if we can get a resurgence on early 2000s horror. So before we go, I did just come across one last news article that I didn't see when I was first doing my perusal of the news of the week. And that is something relevant to earlier in the video when I was talking about Constantine 2. So it's from Bloody Disgusting. The headline states, "Constantine director Francis Lawrence gives promising sequel update." And the article is basically talking about an interview that Lawrence gave to Collider in which he stated, quote, "I will say we are closer than ever to being able to do a sequel, which is a great thing, and Akiva, Keanu, and I are super excited about it." End quote. So there you go, some breaking news based on my earlier speculation on the Constantine sequel update, right? And we got it right from Francis Lawrence. Of course, the interview was coinciding with the 4K release of his original film. That's all the news I have to cover for this episode. Let me know down in the comment section below what news is exciting to you, other news that I maybe missed, and what just general thoughts you have on the state of horror right now. Thank you all for watching, and see you next time.